Acting Chief of UN Humanitarian Affairs, Yahya Jammeh, urged member countries to use all leverage to bring the horrific violence of international humanitarian law and the abuses of human rights law to an end. On the sidelines of the UN High-Level General Assembly debate on Wednesday, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States of America and the European Union and the UN convened a high-level ministerial meeting in support of the humanitarian response in Sudan and the region. Our reporter Sassim Cham tells us more of that in this report.
Speaking on the prevailing humanitarian crisis in Sudan, on the sideline of the UN High-Level General Assembly debate, Yahya Jammeh, acting Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, said there is a need for concerted diplomatic initiative in humanitarian access for the safe, streamlined and swift delivery of aid through all possible routes. She also urged member states to support efforts to scale up the volume assistance through the crossing and to extend the lifeline beyond the initial 3 months duration.
Second, we need a concerted diplomatic push for a step change in humanitarian access, for the safe, streamlined, and swift delivery of aid through all possible routes, both cross-border and cross-line, and for the facilitation of the day-to-day life-saving work of humanitarian organizations on the ground.
The top United Nations humanitarian further announced a $25 million allocation for the United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund to tackle the spread of famine and acute food insecurity in Sudan. This will complement an ongoing allocation of country level from the Sudan Humanitarian Fund. Meanwhile, the U.S. Ambassador at the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, stressed the need for warring parties to accept humanitarian pauses in El Fasher, Khartoum, and other highly vulnerable areas to allow aid to flow and civilians to flee.
And so we must compel, in fact, insist and demand that the warring parties accept humanitarian pauses in El Fasher, Khartoum, and other highly vulnerable areas to allow aid to flow and civilians to flee. And let me be clear, the RSF must immediately halt its deadly assault on El Fasher. But both parties are responsible. Both parties must eliminate barriers to humanitarian access along all routes. And this includes opening the Adre crossing permanently and ensuring the protection and safety of brave humanitarian workers.
The U.S. ambassador also announced that her country is contributing an additional $424 million to the emergency humanitarian response in Sudan and neighboring countries. This funding, she said, is part of the $2 billion the U.S. has contributed since the start of this conflict. African Union senior official Minat Samad Sesioma appealed to the parties in Sudan to end the conflict, saying there can be no winners in this war. She said the first victims are women and children, and the parties must sit down at the negotiating table to find a solution. Hostilities must cease, and above all, international law, humanitarian law, and human rights law must be respected, and access must be provided to the victims, primarily women and children. Nearly 18 months on from the outbreak of the conflict, Sudan is experiencing a humanitarian crisis in devastating proportions. Half of the population is now in need of humanitarian assistance, and more than 10 million people have been displaced from their homes, either within the country or neighboring countries. Reporting for African News, I'm Sam.